The night city of New York shimmered like liquid glass. Towers gleamed in cold blue, and below them, 1,000 untold stories moved quietly among them. Stella Williams, a woman whose world had just collapsed. She stood outside Harper & Company Tech, her reflection flickering on the glass doors. Her janitor uniform was still damp from the rain, her hands trembling not from the cold, but from betrayal. Inside, she could still hear them, James and Tina, laughing softly, unaware she was still outside. For 2 years, she had loved James. She cleaned floors while he chased promotions, telling him every night, "One day, you'll make it big." She never told him the truth, that she could buy the company he worked for with a single signature. Because love, she believed, was pure, only when it wasn't bought. That night, she was called upstairs to clean the 30th floor conference room, the place where James had just signed the biggest deal of his career. When she walked in, everyone turned. The men in suits smirked, and Tina, elegant in red silk, glanced at her with mock pity. "Oh," Tina smiled. "You're here already. The floor does need cleaning." James turned, guilt flickering across his face. "Stella, this isn't a good time." She forced a smile. "No, I think it's the perfect time. Congratulations, by the way. I heard you closed a $100 million deal today." Tina laughed. "He didn't. I did. I'm his boss and his fiancé." The word hit Stella like glass shattering in her chest. She stared at James, waiting for him to deny it. He didn't. Her voice cracked. "You told me you wanted to marry me." "Things change," he muttered, avoiding her eyes. "You're a sweet girl, Stella, but you clean floors. You don't belong in this world." Laughter rippled through the room. Tina pulled out a check and tossed it at her feet. $1 million, she said. "More than you'll ever make. Take it and disappear." For a long moment, Stella just stood there. Then she knelt, not to pick up the check, but to tear it in half. "I don't need your money," she said softly, "because I'm not the one who's small here." James snorted. "Don't start your fairy tales again. You're not rich. You're not anyone." She looked at him one last time, the man who had once promised her forever, and for the first time she smiled, without love. "Maybe not. But I know the people who own this building. You just signed with Mitchell Oil, right?" "Yeah," Tina said, folding her arms. "I got him that deal myself." "No," Stella whispered. "I did." Everyone froze. "You?" Tina scoffed. "You don't even have a badge to get through the lobby." "True," Stella said, walking toward the window, the skyline glowing behind her. "But I do have something better. The last name, Mitchell." The room fell silent. Then came the laughter again, cruel, sharp, echoing off the glass walls. "Nice try," James said. "Stop pretending." "Fine," Stella whispered. "Just remember this moment, James. The next time you walk into Mitchell Oil, you'll find out who really owns your future." She turned and walked out, the sound of torn paper fluttering behind her like wings. Outside, the rain had turned into snow. Her phone buzzed a call from her father. She hesitated, then declined. She wasn't ready to face him. Not yet. He would ask why she was still pretending to be a cleaner, why she hid her name, her power, her inheritance. Because she wanted someone to love her before they saw her worth. As she crossed the street, a silver car pulled up beside her, sleek, quiet, and much too expensive for this part of town. A man stepped out, tall, white, sharp suit, storm gray eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. Richard Castro, the youngest billionaire in New York, though no one would have guessed from the way he stood, like he wanted to disappear into the night. "You shouldn't walk alone this late," he said simply. Stella eyed him warily. And you shouldn't talk to strangers in parking lots. A small smirk. Touché. I heard what happened back there. You were eavesdropping. I was attending the same meeting. I'm a partner. Oh, really? She crossed her arms. Then you must know your new client just humiliated your janitor. I saw, he said, and I didn't like it. Why should you care? He hesitated. Because I know what it's like to be treated like you're less than you are. Their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them. Not pity. Recognition. He handed her a business card. If you ever need a fake fiancé, I'm available. She laughed for the first time that night. Why would I need that? Because he said you just told a room full of people you were an heiress. You'll need someone to back you up. Her smile faded. You heard that. I did. And you think I'm lying? He shrugged. I think you're interesting. She stared at the card. Richard Castro, CEO, Lunar Group. Her pulse skipped. She had heard of him. Everyone had. So Mr. Billionaire? She said softly, you want to play pretend. He looked at her for a long moment. Maybe we both do. Later that night in her small apartment in Brooklyn, Stella sat by the window, snow whispering against the glass. The city below glittered 1,000 stories of power and pain, love and loss. Somewhere among them, hers was just beginning. Her phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. This is Richard. I wasn't joking. Meet me tomorrow. 5 p.m. Lunar Cafe. She smiled faintly. Maybe fate had a strange sense of humor. The next day, she walked into the cafe. Richard was already there in a gray coat sipping coffee like he had all the time in the world. He looked up and smiled, not the kind that charmed, but the kind that saw. So, Miss Mitchell, he said, teasing, ready to make our lie official. She hesitated. Why me? Because you don't want to marry the man your father chose for you. And I don't want to marry the woman my board chose for me. We both need an out. She stared at him. You knew. I do my homework. So this is just a business deal to you? At first, he said, but life has a habit of changing plans. They shook hands. Two strangers both hiding from their own truths. Two hearts that had forgotten how to trust. As she walked away that evening, Stella looked up at the sky. The same city that had broken her was now giving her a second chance. She whispered to herself, if love finds me again, I'll be ready this time. But she didn't see the man in the corner watching James, his eyes dark with jealousy, his pride burning. Sometimes the richest hearts are the ones who had to clean up their own pain first. If you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or forgotten, may this story remind you your worth was never defined by the people who failed to see it. Snow drifted across Fifth Avenue, like quiet confetti falling over the city that never slept. Inside Lunar Cafe, the warm amber light melted against the frost on the windows. Richard sat across from Stella, a single contract between them. He had arrived early, he always did, but she made him wait on purpose. She liked the idea of keeping a billionaire waiting. It reminded her that despite what the world thought, she could still control something. When she finally walked in, the room seemed to shift, not because of her clothes, but because of her composure. She carried herself like someone who had learned to walk through storms without letting them touch her. Sorry I'm late, she said softly, removing her gloves. Richard smiled faintly. No, you're right on time. You just made the world stop for a second. She raised an eyebrow. You always talk like that. Only when I mean it. He slid the contract toward her. Our terms, short, simple, and mutually beneficial. She read it silently. A contract marriage for 6 months. No emotional obligations. Both parties may terminate the agreement if real feelings interfere. Her eyes lingered on the last line. Real feelings, she murmured. That's cute. It's necessary, he said. Feelings complicate everything. Maybe that's the point, she replied, signing the paper with elegant indifference. Their fingers brushed when she handed back the pen. For a moment he froze. Something electric sparked between them, soft, but undeniable. Congratulations, Mrs. Castro, he said quietly. Don't call me that, she replied. It's just business. He smiled. Of course, until it isn't. That evening, Stella moved into Richard's penthouse overlooking Central Park. The space was all glass and silent, sterile, expensive, lonely. She walked around the room, her reflection multiplied across mirrored walls. The city's heartbeat echoed faintly through the glass horns, laughter the pulse of a place too alive to sleep. This feels like a museum, she said. Everything's perfect, but no one lives here. Richard glanced at her from across the room. That's what happens when you build walls high enough to keep everyone out. And yet you let a stranger move in, she said. What does that say about you? That I'm tired of being alone, he admitted. The honesty in his voice startled her. For a man who wore control like armor, that confession felt like a crack of light through metal. Days turned into a quiet rhythm. Stella brewed coffee in the mornings. Richard left for work before sunrise. At night he returned to find her reading by the window, always barefoot, wrapped in the city's dim glow. They didn't speak much, but silence between them was never empty. It was full of something unnamed, curiosity maybe, or the slow blooming of trust. One night he found her asleep on the couch, a half-finished novel slipping from her hands. He picked it up, The Great Gatsby. He smiled, faintly, whispering figures. She stirred. What Gatsby, he said. A man who built everything for love and lost it anyway. Her eyes were still heavy with sleep. Maybe he didn't lose. Maybe he just found that love isn't a mansion you build. It's the air you breathe. He stared at her, struck by the quiet poetry in her words. You really believe that I have to? She said softly. It's the only reason I'm still here. 2 days later, they attended a charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, their first public appearance as husband and wife. The flashes began the moment they stepped out of the car. Reporters screamed their names, and Stella, in a black satin gown and diamond earrings, borrowed from the Mitchell vault, smiled like she was born for it. You handle attention well, Richard murmured as they entered the hall. I was raised in it, she said. I just forgot how much it stings. They moved through the crowd, hand in hand, playing their parts. But when Richard leaned in to whisper something in her ear, the air between them grew warmer than it should have. You don't have to pretend so hard, he said. She turned slightly, her lips grazing the edge of his jaw as she replied. Who says I'm pretending? For the first time, Richard felt something shift inside him, the quiet recognition of danger. He was beginning to care. Later that night, after the party ended, they stood together on the balcony overlooking the glittering city. Wind tangled her curls, snow catching in them like stars. Tell me something true, she said suddenly. He looked at her. Something true. Yes, something no one else knows. He hesitated. My mother died when I was 15. My father remarried a woman who cared more about inheritance than love. Since then, I've been fighting to prove I can stand on my own. She was silent for a long moment, then said, I'm sorry. Don't be, he said. It made me who I am. And who is that really? He smiled faintly. A man who's good at pretending he's fine. She nodded slowly. Then maybe we're more alike than we think. He turned toward her. Your turn. She met his gaze. I lost my mother too. And I've been pretending ever since, pretending I'm poor, so no one would want me for my money." He stared at her, the air suddenly still. "So, you weren't lying." She looked out over the city, eyes glimmering. "No, I just didn't think it mattered who I was." Richard stepped closer. "It matters now." For a heartbeat, they stood inches apart, two souls caught between truth and fear. Then she looked away. "Good night, Mr. Castro. Good night, Miss Mitchell." That night, neither of them slept. He watched the skyline until dawn. She listened to the hum of the city, wondering when pretending had started to feel like home. Next morning, tabloids screamed, "Lunar CEO secretly married, mystery woman." Every headline carried her photograph radiant, confident, untouchable. But in the quiet of the penthouse, she still tied her hair with the same rubber band, still washed her own dishes, still hummed gospel tunes while cleaning habits of a life she couldn't erase. Richard watched her from the doorway, the corner of his mouth softening. "You don't have to do that," he said. She looked up. "What clean? We have staff for that." She smiled. "I know, but cleaning keeps me grounded. Reminds me who I was before I became this." He stepped closer. "Who you are is what makes this real." She froze the sponge still in her hand. "Don't say things you can't mean." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I mean too much." That night, as snow fell against the windows once more, Stella stood at the balcony, arms wrapped around herself. Richard joined her silence, stretching between them, like a fragile bridge. She whispered, "Do you ever wonder if love can start from a lie?" He looked at her eyes, soft. "All love starts with pretending until someone decides to make it real." She turned to him slowly. "And which one of us will break first?" He smiled sadly. "Maybe both." The wind sighed through the city. Inside that penthouse of glass and distance, two hearts began to beat, not for convenience, but for something dangerously close to love. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall glass windows of the penthouse, brushing soft gold across the marble floors. Stella stood in the kitchen, her hair tied loosely, humming under her breath as she poured coffee into 2 cups. Richard walked in, crisp suit, phone in hand, already speaking to someone about a deal worth hundreds of millions. He paused mid-sentence when he saw her. She was barefoot, wearing one of his white shirts, oversized on her frame, sleeves rolled to her elbows. For a moment, the world outside disappeared. She looked up, caught his gaze, and smiled lightly. "Black coffee, right?" He nodded, wordless. The call resumed, but his voice wasn't the same. Something about her presence, the ease, the calm, broke through his polished armor. Later that morning, Stella sat by the window reading. Richard joined her, carrying his laptop. They worked in silence, like two strangers who had begun to learn each other's breathing. "Do you ever get tired of pretending?" she asked, suddenly still looking at the pages. He looked up. "Pretending what? That everything's fine, that you're in control, that this is just a deal." He smiled faintly. "Aren't you the same?" "Maybe," she said. "But lately I'm starting to forget which part of me is the lie." Her voice carried the softness of confession. He wanted to ask more, but before he could, her phone rang. The caller ID read, "Raymond Mitchell." She froze, then pressed ignore. That evening they attended a small business dinner. A room full of suits, wine, and whispers. Tina was there, dazzling in silver, her smile laced with venom. "Oh," she said sweetly, "the famous Mrs. Castro. I almost didn't recognize you without your mop." Stella smiled back, unbothered. "And I almost didn't recognize you without your conscience." The table fell silent. Richard's lips twitched, half amusement, half pride. Tina leaned forward. "Tell me, Do you clean the penthouse too? Or just the CEO's heart? I leave the dirt to people who enjoy it, Stella said quietly. Tina's smile faltered. Careful, sweetheart. Some of us were born to lead, some to serve. Stella's tone didn't change, and some forget that life has a funny way of switching roles. The conversation moved on, but Richard couldn't take his eyes off her. This woman who fought with grace, sharper than any weapon. After dinner, he found her outside, leaning against his car, arms folded against the cold. You didn't have to do that, he said. Do what defend me. She looked at him. I wasn't defending you. I was defending myself. He nodded. Still, you were incredible. Don't say that, she murmured. You'll make me think you mean it. He stepped closer. And if I do? Her eyes flickered, fear, hope, something she didn't want to name. Then that's your problem, Richard. She slipped into the car before he could answer. The drive back to the penthouse was quiet. Snow fell again, heavier this time, covering the city in white silence. When they got home, Stella went straight to the balcony, pulling her coat tighter. Richard followed, standing beside her without speaking. I used to think money could fix everything, she said softly. Then I watched it destroy the people I loved. He turned slightly toward her. And now I think maybe love is the only thing that can't be bought. He hesitated. You talk like someone who's been rich. Her lips curved into a sad smile. Maybe I just learned from the wrong rich people. He looked at her for a long time, wondering who she really was. Days became weeks. Their contract marriage had started as a performance, but something was shifting beneath the surface. She began to understand his quiet moments, the way he stared at the skyline when he was lost, or the way his hand lingered on the piano keys without ever playing. He began to understand her silences too, the weight in her eyes when she saw news about the oil industry, the tremor in her voice when she said she hated liars. They lived side by side, two masks slowly cracking. One night, Richard woke from a dream, his mother's voice calling his name. He found Stella asleep on the couch again, a soft blanket slipping from her shoulders. Without thinking, he knelt beside her and tucked it back around her. Her lips moved slightly. Richard. He froze. She was dreaming. Don't go, she whispered. He stayed. Until dawn, he stayed. The next morning, Stella woke to the smell of pancakes. She blinked in disbelief. Richard, in a white shirt and apron, flipping pancakes like a man who'd never done it before. What are you doing? She laughed, trying to prove I can feed myself. You look ridiculous. I'm aware, he said, smiling. But if this marriage is a performance, we might as well improvise breakfast scenes. She sat laughing softly, watching him struggle with the spatula. For a fleeting second, everything felt real normal, like a life that could actually exist. Then came the call. Richard's father. Dinner. Tomorrow. Bring your wife. The words felt heavy. He hadn't told his family about the contract. They thought this marriage was real, a love match, not a loophole. He looked at Stella, his voice quiet. My father wants to meet you. She met his eyes. Then let's meet him. It won't be easy. Neither was this, she said, nodding toward their intertwined lives. The next evening, the Castro mansion stood like an empire carved from stone and legacy. Inside, chandeliers gleamed like judgment. Richard's father, Abel Castro, waited at the head of the table. His half-sister Samantha lounged with a wine glass, eyes sharp as knives. So Abel said slowly, studying Stella, "This is the woman who made my son defy tradition." Stella smiled politely. "If by tradition you mean arranged marriages, then?" "Yes, I'm guilty." Samantha scoffed. "You must be very persuasive, or very desperate. I'm both, Stella said calmly, persuasive enough to survive, desperate enough to still believe in love. The room went quiet. Abel leaned back intrigued. You have courage. I'll give you that. Samantha stood abruptly. Courage doesn't make you family. She accidentally spilled wine on Stella's dress. Oh dear. How clumsy of me, she said, voice dripping with malice. Perhaps the maid in you can clean that. Before anyone could move, Richard slammed his glass down. Enough. His voice filled the room cold final. If being your heir means tolerating this, I resign. Samantha's smirk vanished. Abel's expression darkened. Think carefully, son. I have, Richard said, taking Stella's hand. This is my wife, and if you can't respect her, you don't respect me. He led her out, the echoes of their footsteps louder than the applause of any empire. Back in the car, silence wrapped around them. Stella's hand trembled slightly in his. You didn't have to. I wanted to. He interrupted. For once in my life, I wanted to. She turned toward him. Richard. He looked at her, and for a moment, neither spoke. Then he leaned in and kissed her soft, unsure, honest. It wasn't passion. It was something deeper, the kind of kiss that asks for permission to stay. When they pulled apart, she whispered, We shouldn't. I know, he said, but maybe we already have. That night, as the city slept, the walls they'd built began to fall one heartbeat at a time. And though neither would admit it yet, both knew. This marriage, once born from lies, was becoming the most honest thing they'd ever known. The next morning, the penthouse felt heavier than usual. The silence wasn't cold. It was thick, filled with things neither of them dared to say. Stella stood by the kitchen window, her fingers tracing the condensation on the glass. The city looked blurry, like it was breathing through the fog. Behind her, Richard entered quietly. No suit today, just a gray sweater, hair, a little disheveled, eyes, softer than she'd ever seen. Did you sleep? He asked. She shook her head. Barely. Because of last night, her lips curved into a faint smile. You mean the part where you defied your father, or the part where you kissed your fake wife? He exhaled. Both. They stood there for a long moment, the sound of the city muffled by the glass, their hearts louder than either wanted to admit. Finally, she broke the silence. You should call him. I will, he said. Just not yet. Hours later, Richard's phone buzzed. His father's assistant, stern as ever. Monsieur, Mr. Castro expects you at the office by noon. Alone. Richard frowned. He knew what that meant. Punishment, persuasion, or both. Stella looked up from her laptop. Go, she said softly. He's still your father. He met her eyes. You sound like you're forgiving him. I'm not, she replied. But you'll regret it if you don't face him. The Castro Tower loomed like a monument to legacy and control. Inside, the air smelled of money and quiet power. Abel Castro stood by the window, his reflection cut against the Manhattan skyline. He didn't turn as Richard entered. So Abel began, voice low. You've decided to destroy everything I built. Richard kept his tone calm. I didn't destroy it, Father. I just refused to sell my soul for it. Abel turned, eyes glinting with restrained fury. You call it your soul. I call it your duty. My duty isn't to marry someone for a merger, Richard said evenly, or to let Samantha humiliate the woman I care about. Care about. Abel stepped forward, voice rising. She's a distraction, a woman with no name, no family, no power. You're wrong, Richard said quietly. She has more strength than anyone in this room ever will. For a heartbeat, silence filled the office. Then Abel spoke, each word cutting like glass. If you walk away from this family, you walk away from everything. The company, the inheritance, the name. You'll be nothing. Richard's jaw tightened. Then I'll start from nothing. He turned and left the door closing behind him, with the finality of thunder. That evening he returned home later than usual. Stella was waiting in the living room, a book in her lap, but unread. "You saw him?" she said. He nodded. "He gave me a choice. Let me guess, his empire, or me." Richard's smile was tired. "You're not wrong." She rose from the couch, walked to him, and placed a gentle hand on his cheek. "You shouldn't have to choose." He caught her hand. "Maybe I already did." Days passed. News broke across the business world. Richard Castro steps down from Lunar Group. The headlines were merciless. The fallen heir, the rebellion, the scandalous wife. Investors panicked. Reporters camped outside their building. Stella couldn't even buy groceries without cameras flashing in her face. She kept her head high until one afternoon when she saw Tina again. The other woman smiled with cruel delight. "Well, well, looks like your fairy tale didn't last long. How does it feel to bring down a billionaire?" Stella said nothing, but inside she felt something shift, not fear, but resolve. When she returned home, she found Richard staring out the window, his expression unreadable. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. He turned. "What, choosing me?" Richard's gaze softened. "Stella, I didn't choose you over my family. I chose you because you're the only thing that ever felt real." Her eyes glimmered. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why?" "Because I might start believing you." One night, unable to sleep, Stella went for a walk. The city lights were distant stars under her feet. She stopped at a small chapel, the kind that stayed open for lost souls. Inside it smelled like wax and prayers. She sat in the back row, closed her eyes, and whispered, "Mom, if you can hear me, tell me I'm doing the right thing." A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "You are." She opened her eyes. Abel Castro stood a few pews away, hands clasped behind his back. "What are you doing here?" she asked, startled. He sighed. "Looking for answers, maybe forgiveness." She rose slowly. "You don't need mine." "Maybe I do," he said, "because I treated you like an outsider when you were the only one strong enough to love my son without his name." Her throat tightened. "You came all this way to say that?" "No," Abel said quietly. "I came to warn you. Raymond Mitchell has returned to New York. He's not happy." Her blood ran cold. My father, Abel, nodded. "He wants to reclaim what's his, and that includes you." That night, Stella couldn't sleep. Her past, the one she'd buried under a new name, was stirring again. She remembered her father's voice, heavy with command. "You are a Mitchell. You don't love. You marry for legacy." She looked at Richard sleeping beside her, the man who had given up everything to keep her safe. And for the first time, fear entered her heart. Not for herself, for him. The next morning, Richard found her packing a suitcase. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "I have to go," she said, her voice steady but her eyes shining with tears. "Before my father finds you." He grabbed her wrist. "You think running will protect me? It'll protect you from me," she said. "My family destroys everything it touches." He pulled her closer, desperate. "I don't care who your father is, Stella. You're not running again." Her hands trembled on his chest. "You don't understand. If he comes for me, he'll come for you too." "Then let him," Richard said. "I'm done living like my father's son or anyone's puppet. If war is what he wants, then let's fight it together." Her resolve cracked. She buried her face against his shoulder, whispering, "You'll regret this." He kissed her hair. Not if it means keeping you. Outside the city roared beneath them, a storm of headlines, legacy and love that refused to bow. And as dawn spilled over Manhattan, two people who had lost everything finally realized what they had left each other. The night after Stella decided to stay, the city didn't rest. Neither did she. The weight of her father's name pressed against her ribs like a secret she could no longer hold. Richard slept lightly beside her, one arm draped over her waist, the other hand still resting near the phone, an instinct from years of running a company that demanded control even in dreams. But there was something different about the way he held her. Not as possession, not as protection. As if he was afraid that if he let go, she would vanish into the dawn. When the sun broke through the curtains, Stella slipped quietly out of bed. She poured herself a glass of water and stood by the window staring at the horizon. Her reflection stared back, calm, polished, but fractured. "Good morning." Richard's voice came from behind her, low and rough from sleep. "Morning," she replied without turning. "You were up all night. Couldn't sleep." He stepped closer. "Thinking about your father." She nodded once. Richard reached out and touched her shoulder gently. "Then let's stop running. Whatever it is, whoever he is, I can face it." She turned to him, her eyes dark and unreadable. "You don't know what you're offering, Richard. My father isn't like yours. He doesn't forgive. He doesn't lose." Richard's jaw tightened. "Then he hasn't met me." By midday, news of her real identity began to leak. It started with whispers in the financial world, then headlines, then chaos. The billionaire's wife is an heiress to Mitchell Oil, the cleaner who married into power, now revealed as Texas royalty. Photographers flooded the street outside their building. Her phone rang nonstop. Board members, lawyers, old acquaintances, enemies wearing polite voices. Richard shut the curtains, shutting out the city. Who told them, he demanded. "I don't know," Stella said quietly. "But I can guess." That evening, a black limousine arrived at the entrance of the penthouse. The driver stepped out, handed Richard an envelope, and left without a word. Inside, written in heavy ink thinner, "Tomorrow night, 8 p.m. The Plaza Hotel. Bring your wife. Raymond Mitchell." Richard's eyes hardened. So it begins. The next night, Stella dressed in silence. Her gown was midnight blue, elegant and understated. A necklace, simple gold, hung around her throat, the same one her mother had given her before she died. Richard watched her from the doorway. "You don't have to go." "Yes, I do," she said. "He'll come for me either way. I'd rather meet him standing." The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was already filled when they arrived. Old money, new power, champagne, and gossip. At the center table sat Raymond Mitchell, tall, silver-haired, his presence cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. When Stella entered, every conversation stopped. "Darling," Raymond said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You finally stopped hiding." She took a breath. "I wasn't hiding. I was living." He rose, clasping her shoulders, inspecting her like a possession returned after being misplaced. "And this is the man who thinks he can protect you from me." Richard extended his hand. "Richard Castro." "Pleasure to finally meet you, sir." Raymond didn't take it. "You're the son of Abel Castro." "Interesting. The family we once nearly merged with before your father betrayed our deal." Richard's tone didn't waver. Maybe it wasn't betrayal. Maybe it was self-respect. Raymond chuckled. "Self-respect is what poor men say when they lose." Dinner was quiet at first, until Raymond began his assault in earnest. He spoke of legacies, control, lineage. He spoke as though love were an inconvenience, as though his daughter were an investment. "You married beneath you, Stella. I raised you better." She put her fork down. No, father. You raised me to be useful, not loved. Raymond's expression darkened. Love is temporary. Power is not. Then why are you alone? She asked quietly. The table froze. Raymond's eyes flared, but Stella didn't look away. For the first time, she wasn't the obedient daughter. After dinner, as they stood in the grand hallway, he approached her again. You think this man loves you? He said coldly. He loves the fight, not you. She looked him in the eye. Then let him fight. At least he's not afraid to bleed for something real. For a moment, Raymond looked almost human. Something like regret flickered, then vanished. Very well, he said. If you choose him, you choose war. When they left the plaza, the flashlights blinded them again. But this time, Stella didn't bow her head. She slipped her hand into Richard's and held on tight. He squeezed back. You okay? She nodded. For the first time, yes. They rode in silence until he finally said, You were extraordinary in there. She smiled faintly. You didn't do too badly yourself, Mr. Castro. They laughed, small, tired, but real. Later that night, they sat by the fire in their living room. Outside, the storm had begun, literally and otherwise. Wind howled against the windows, and the first drops of rain streaked down the glass. Stella stared into the flames. He won't stop Richard. My father doesn't lose wars, he destroys them. Then we'll outlast him. You can't fight him like a businessman. He doesn't play fair. Richard reached for her hand. I don't need to play fair. I just need to play for you. Her throat tightened. You'll lose everything. He looked at her eyes steady. Then I'll build everything again with you. That night, as the rain battered the city, Stella finally let herself cry not from fear, but from the unbearable mix of love and guilt. Richard held her, saying nothing. When she finally whispered, I don't deserve you, he answered softly. Then let me be the fool who thinks you do. 2 days later, the war began. Mitchell Oil launched a hostile acquisition bid for what remained of Lunar Group's assets. Richard's name was dragged through the mud, reckless, emotional, incompetent. But Stella knew better. She had seen how her father operated with silence, with power, with fear. And this time, she wasn't the frightened daughter anymore. She walked into the headquarters of Mitchell Oil, unannounced. Executives whispered. Secretaries froze. When she stepped into the boardroom, Raymond turned from the window, surprised. Stella, I came to remind you, she said, that I'm not part of your company. I'm part of your conscience, the one you keep trying to bury. He narrowed his eyes. What are you doing? He laid a document on the table. I just transferred 20% of my shares to Richard Castro. The room erupted in gasps. Raymond stared at her furious. You're giving my empire to a man you barely know? No, she said quietly. I'm giving it to the man who reminded me I'm not a thing to be owned. That night she returned home shaking, but lighter than she'd ever felt. Richard met her at the door. What did you do? I did what I should have done years ago, she said. I stopped being afraid of my last name. He cupped her face, eyes filled with something fierce and fragile. Stella Mitchell, he whispered. You're going to ruin me. She smiled through her tears. Maybe, but I'll rebuild you too. The following week blurred into a haze of crisis meetings, press statements and silent glances between two people caught between love and legacy. Every headline was a wound, every whispered rumor a knife. Mitchell Oil takes full control of Lunar Group. Stella Mitchell betrays her own bloodline. The world had turned their love story into a scandal, and neither of them could control it anymore. Richard spent his days on the phone trying to save what was left of his reputation. Stella spent hers shielding him from the damage she had caused by exposing herself. But what hurt most wasn't the chaos outside. It was what was slowly cracking inside them. One evening, as the storm outside faded to a drizzle, Richard sat alone in the study. The fire had burned low, throwing amber shadows across the room. His tie hung loose, his expression unreadable. Stella walked in quietly, holding 2 cups of tea. He didn't look up. "You've been in here for hours," she said softly. "I'm trying to stop your father from taking everything." He replied, voice low, "But I think it's already too late." She placed the tea beside him. "Then let him take it. We'll rebuild." Richard looked at her, then really looked, and his eyes carried something she hadn't seen before. Fear. Not of failure, but of her. Rebuild with what he asked. Love. Love doesn't pay salaries. It doesn't stop empires from falling. Her lips trembled. "Is that what you think we are now? A failure?" He rubbed his temples. "I think I'm a man who's lost everything because he couldn't protect the one person he stopped himself." She stared at him. "Say it." "Because he couldn't protect the one person he loves," he said quietly. The room fell silent. It should have healed something. Instead, it broke her. Because love, she realized, wasn't the same thing as peace. The next morning, Richard woke up to an empty bed. Her side was cold. He found her on the balcony, her robe billowing in the wind, eyes lost in the skyline. "Couldn't sleep again?" he asked. "I dreamed of my mother," she said. "She told me that love without freedom becomes another kind of prison." He stepped beside her. "You're not my prisoner, Stella." "No," she whispered, "but I feel like I'm yours. And maybe that's my fault, because I keep choosing you, even when it hurts us both." Richard's chest tightened. "You're saying you regret this?" She shook her head. "No, I'm saying maybe we need to stop saving each other long enough to save ourselves." Later that day, Abel Castro called. He hadn't spoken to Richard in weeks, not since the night of the confrontation. "Son," he said simply, "come to the house. It's time we talk." When Richard arrived, his father was standing in the courtyard, hands clasped behind his back. Age had crept into his face, the kind of wear that comes from pride, not time. "I watched you burn everything down," Abel said. "For love." "I didn't burn it," Richard replied. "I let it die so I could breathe." Abel sighed. "Then learn this lesson, son. Empires can be rebuilt, but trust, once lost, it becomes a ghost." Richard didn't answer. He knew his father wasn't just talking about business. Meanwhile, in another corner of the city, Stella entered a small hospital chapel. Her father was there, Raymond Mitchell, seated in the front pew. He turned when she approached. "I thought you'd come sooner. I didn't think you'd want to see me." Raymond smiled faintly. "I always want to see you. You're my daughter, even when you hate me." "I don't hate you," she said. "I pity you." He chuckled softly. "Then maybe we're even. Because for the first time, I pity myself too." There was silence. Then his voice turned colder. "You gave away 20% of my empire. I gave away 20% of my life," she said. "The part you kept trying to own." His expression darkened. "You think love can replace power? It won't last, Stella. Men like him, they don't stay when the lights go out." "He already stayed," she whispered, "when you never did." For the first time, he had no reply. That evening, she returned home to find Richard in the piano room, the same grand piano he never played. His fingers hovered over the keys, hesitant. "You play?" she asked. "I used to. My mother taught me." "What stopped you, Ive?" He looked up at her, the faintest smile on his lips. "Sit with me." She did. Their shoulders brushed. He began to play haltingly, then smoother each note, soft as an apology. The melody filled the space between them, fragile and pure. When it ended, Stella whispered, "That's beautiful." He turned to her. "So are you, even when you're breaking me." Tears welled in her eyes. "Then maybe stop loving me, Richard." "I've tried," he said. "It doesn't work." Days later, disaster struck. A leaked memo revealed that Mitchell Oil had falsified environmental records for decades. Public outrage erupted. Stocks crashed. For the first time, Raymond Mitchell was on the defensive. And in a cruel twist of irony, the documents that exposed him came from someone inside his own circle, anonymous source SM. The media went wild. Raymond's empire trembled. In the chaos, Stella received a message. "Meet me at the old Mitchell estate, tonight." When she arrived, she found her father waiting in the grand hallway. "You leaked the files," he said calmly. She met his gaze. "I told the truth. You destroyed me." "No," she said, voice breaking. "You destroyed yourself the day you forgot people are not property." He stepped closer, eyes blazing. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've doomed us all." "No, Father," she whispered. "I freed us." When she left the estate, Richard was waiting in the car. She slid into the seat, trembling. "You did it," he said softly. She nodded. "He'll never forgive me. Then he'll have to live long enough to watch you become something he never could free." That night, for the first time in months, Stella slept soundly. No guilt, no fear. Just the quiet sound of rain against the window and the man beside her, who had lost a kingdom just to give her back her name. The days after the scandal felt eerily calm, the kind of calm that comes after a hurricane when everything lies broken but strangely still. Mitchell Oil's stock had collapsed. Investigations opened in multiple states. The media called it the fall of the oil dynasty. And at the center of it all was Stella the heiress, who exposed her own father. Richard watched from the sidelines as chaos devoured everything the Mitchell name once stood for. He didn't say much, but in his silence she heard both admiration and worry. "You should hate me," she said one night, staring into the fire. "For what?" he asked. "For dragging you into this war." He leaned back in his chair, eyes on her. "You think I'd rather live in peace without you, wouldn't you?" He smiled faintly. "Peace is overrated." The next morning, the front page carried a new headline: Raymond Mitchell hospitalized after stroke. The cup slipped from Stella's hand, shattering on the kitchen floor. She didn't cry. She didn't move. She just stood there staring at the headline. Richard stepped forward, catching her shoulders. "Hey, look at me. You're not responsible for this." But she couldn't hear him. The room spun. The air disappeared. That evening she was at the hospital. The man lying on the bed no longer looked like the tycoon the world feared. Tubes, monitors, sterile light, everything smelled of endings. "Stella," a voice rasped. "His." Her heart stuttered. She took his hand. "I'm here, Dad." He looked at her through glassy eyes, the arrogance gone, replaced by something fragile. "You destroyed me," he whispered. "I told the truth," she said. He tried to smile. "Maybe both can be true." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "Why couldn't you just love me?" Raymond closed his eyes. "Because I didn't know how. Until now." The monitor beeped steadily. He was still alive, but something inside him was already gone. For the next few days, Stella stayed by his side. Richard visited once, quietly leaving flowers by the window before slipping out again. When she finally came home, She found him waiting on the balcony, the skyline behind him, a blur of lights. "How is he alive?" she said. "But he's not really there anymore." He nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." She looked out at the city. "You ever wonder if love and forgiveness are the same thing?" he said. "Love is what makes you want to forgive. Forgiveness is what lets you keep loving." She smiled faintly. "You always know what to say." "That's not true. I just know when to shut up and listen." Weeks passed. The investigations into Mitchell Oil widened, but so did the opportunities. A coalition of smaller green energy firms approached Richard with a proposal, a merger that would reshape the industry. For the first time, he saw a way to rebuild, not with oil, not with greed, but with something clean, something new. He told Stella about it over dinner. "It's everything my father would hate," he said, eyes glinting. "Then it must be good," she teased. He reached for her hand. "But I don't want to start this without you." "Why?" she asked softly. "Because I've learned something from all of this. Every empire ends, but love, if it survives the ashes, becomes something else. Legacy." Her eyes shimmered. "Richard, are you asking me to be your partner?" "In business," he said with a smirk. "And whatever else you're willing to give me." She laughed, the first real laugh in months. Then yes. 1 month later, they stood before a wall of reporters. The launch event for Lunar Renew, a clean energy startup, co-founded by Richard Castro and Stella Mitchell, drew the attention of the entire nation. She took the microphone poised and calm. "My father's empire was built on oil," she said. "Ours will be built on change, on the courage to do better." The applause thundered. Richard looked at her from the side of the stage, radiant, fierce, unstoppable. And in that moment, he knew the woman once ashamed of her last name had just turned it into a symbol of redemption. That night, when they returned home, the penthouse was quiet again. But it wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was peace. Stella poured 2 glasses of wine and joined him on the balcony. Below, the city shimmered vast and alive. "Do you ever think we'd get here?" she asked. "No," he said honestly. "But I knew we'd survive long enough to find out." She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "I used to think love meant choosing someone. Now I think it means choosing the same person, even when everything falls apart." He smiled, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Then keep choosing me, always." And for the first time in forever, there was no storm outside, only the quiet hum of a city that had learned, just like them, that sometimes things have to break before they can shine. It was spring again in New York. The city was soft with sunlight and second chances. And somewhere above the skyline in the penthouse that had once felt too big, too cold, laughter drifted through the open windows. Stella was barefoot, a mug of coffee in her hand, watching Richard fix the small wooden frame around the balcony garden. He looked nothing like the man she'd met months ago, the billionaire with the sharp suits and sharper walls. This man hummed off key, wore rolled sleeves, and smiled like the world no longer owed him anything. "You missed a nail," she teased. "I'm not a carpenter. I'm improvising," he said, grinning. "You're terrible at it." He shrugged. "Then I guess I need a teacher." She leaned against the doorframe. "Good thing I'm patient." He looked up, sunlight catching his blue eyes. "No, Stella, you're not patient. You're forgiving, and somehow you still forgive me." She walked over and cupped his face. "Because you stopped being a storm. You learned how to stay." That afternoon, they drove out to the Hudson River. No photographers, no boardrooms, no bodyguards, just the quiet hum of the wind and the echo of memories. There, beneath an old oak tree, stood a small crowd, family, friends, and a priest, waiting with a smile. It wasn't a wedding planned for spectacle. It was a promise, one they'd both earned the hard way. Stella wore a simple white dress. Her curls framed her face, soft and free. Richard waited in a navy suit, his hands shaking slightly, though his smile didn't waver. When she reached him, he whispered, "You sure about this?" She smiled. "For the first time in my life, yes." The priest spoke softly. "Marriage is not a contract. It's a choice, one you make every day, even when it hurts." Stella took a deep breath, her voice steady. "When I first met you, I thought you were everything I hated about the world. Arrogant, distant, unreachable. But now I know you were just scared. And so was I. You taught me that love isn't about saving each other. It's about growing beside each other." Richard blinked hard, swallowing the lump in his throat. "My whole life I measured success by what I owned. Until I met you. You made me realize that love is the only thing that multiplies when shared. You didn't fix me, Stella. You made me want to fix myself." The priest smiled. "Then by the power vested in me." Before he could finish, Richard leaned in and kissed her, not out of impulse, but out of quiet certainty. The crowd laughed and cheered. The wind carried the sound over the river where sunlight danced like liquid gold. Later, as they danced on the grass barefoot, Richard whispered, "I don't know what comes next." Stella looked up at him, her eyes warm. "Then let's write it together." He kissed her temple. "You and me against the world." She grinned. "No, you and me with the world. We've already fought it long enough." That night, back in the city, they stood by the window, the same place where it all began. Below them, Manhattan pulsed with life. Stella rested her head on his chest, listening to the rhythm that had once raced with ambition, now calm with peace. "Do you ever think about the people we used to be?" she asked. "Every day," he said. "And I thank them for surviving long enough to become us." Months later, their company Lunar Renew became a symbol of redemption. Energy that healed rather than destroyed. Love that built rather than burned. The world moved on. So did they. But not from each other. On their anniversary, Richard placed a small envelope on the breakfast table. Inside was a note written in his neat, slanted handwriting. "You once told me love without freedom is a prison. So I bought us a house with no walls, just glass and light. Meet me there tonight." That evening, as she walked into the open sunlit home by the sea, Richard stood waiting barefoot, holding 2 rings made of recycled metal from their first construction site. "Guess we're building again," he said. She smiled. "Always." He slipped the ring onto her finger and whispered, "For richer or poorer, for chaos or calm, I'll still choose you." And when they kissed, it wasn't the ending of a love story. It was the proof that love, real love, doesn't end at "I do." It begins there and keeps beginning every single day. Because love isn't about finding perfection. It's about finding someone who stays when everything breaks and still chooses to build with you. If this story touched your heart, take a deep breath. Think of the person you'd still choose, even after everything, and tell them today.